Welcome to the 3x5. Just give me a second while I roll up the old teleprompter. The 3x5, where news, views, and reviews scribbled on index cards. We get in and out fast, so keep up. Today, men, what's with them, and why do they struggle so much with empathy? We have more to blame than just The Apprentice for you-know-who. Big Donald, WWE's COVID assassin. The core of MAGA hostility to undocumented immigrants. Epic fail, American actors, British accents. Let's begin with an admission. I bet I'm not the only one, but I confess I never really knew what exactly the word politics means. It's kind of a vague, all-purpose term. For example, if you look at dictionary.com, the first meaning is the science or art of political government. Wait, they're defining a noun by using its adjective? Whatever. I then looked up political. It's defined as, quote, of, relating to, or concerned with politics, taking us right back where we started. Thanks for nothing. Speaking of words, my friend at work, who shall remain nameless because, hey, who wants their privacy further invaded, has expressed on a couple of occasions her concerns about how many Americans lack empathy. To many men, empathy might seem weak. It could even be construed as an Achilles heel in their ability to defend themselves, their family, and the MAGA nation at large. But what if their wives or girlfriends call them out on their lack of sensitivity? Can empathy be learned or willed? First, let's ask, what is empathy? Empathy. Basically, imagining yourself in another's shoes. That's the key word, imagination. Something too many lack, the ability to imagine. Once you give yourself permission to imagine, assuming it's not plans to overthrow the government, the ability to empathize should follow. Men are like anchors dug in the sand, holding the country back. Did you see this headline in the New York Times? Quote, in a first, young men are more religious than young women, unquote. We're all familiar with the stereotype of women being more pious and attending church, especially if you grew up Catholic as I did. But this article is about evangelicals and fundamentalists. As for the men, Christianity, one pastor said, is viewed as one institution that's initially and formally skeptical of them as a class. Also, they are attracted by, quote, the theology of complementarianism. Complementarianism, you might not have heard of it, I never did, which asserts that men and women have some separate roles in marriage and church leadership. It's resurgent, and many of these same churches are beginning to speak more openly about their conservative political convictions. Young women, it seems, are moving past the debates and out the church doors, unquote. We have all seen this before. The Inquisition, witch trials, and in recent years, the Taliban, the Iranian Revolution. Men want to call the shots in the family and government, including over women's reproductive rights. Such views are less likely to make them seem like marriage in material than budding incels. Read the Taliban, as the Washington Post reported this week. After stifling women to an unimaginable extent, they are now cracking down on men for things like beard length. The author writes, some men now wonder whether they should have spoken up sooner to defend the freedoms of their wives and daughters, unquote. You think? You could be next, America. It wasn't just The Apprentice that ushered Trump onto the national scene. Also in the Times, Tom Edsall writes, and I paraphrase, that Trump existed in a universe separate from traditional politics. He operated a world rooted in 25 years he spent in pro wrestling, in which people put up good money to watch fake, quote, fights. They know when their hearts were fixed. In other words, right from the get-go, Many of supporters could care less about what's real and what's not, lies and truths. Sorry, but I just can't stop thinking about all the COVID deaths for which Trump was responsible. Excuse me, I'm old. I'm just going to drop this also from the Times without comment. I mean, what can I say? According to a Kaiser survey, quote, more than 230,000 Americans died unnecessarily between June 2021 and March 2022, largely because misinformation caused them to turn away from what might have saved them in the midst of a dangerous pandemic. This death rate is the equivalent of 4 fully loaded 737s crashing every day. The real reason MAGA hates immigrants, arguably the main issue that today's prevailing model of conservatism, the MAGA movement, coalesces around, is undocumented immigrants. They are labeled as everything from Mexican rapists to cartel drug dealers to individuals stealing American jobs to even terrorists from the Middle East as well as Chinese. But what I suspect really sticks in the craw of MAGA types is resentment that undocumented immigrants are receiving services that Americans pay for with their taxes. Yes, they can enroll their children in school and receive emergency medical treatment. Yes, they are eligible for other services, but how many undocumented immigrants, fearful of being caught and deported, seek those out? Yes, coping with illegal immigration is expensive for federal and state governments. But if you're a prosperous nation, isn't that part of the cost of doing business? This kind of thinking on the part of MAGA types embodies one of the ugliest sides of Americans. The fear that someone else poorer than you might be receiving benefits that you aren't, or that your taxes are help paying for, from what used to be called welfare to affirmative action to food stamps. Now on to the cultural. Why, oh why do American actors even bother with British accents? British actors are notorious for nailing American accents, or at least Gen Am, the so-called General American accent. Okay, maybe they are not so hot with Southern accents. For that matter, Americans who aren't from the South are almost entirely unable to carry off any of the various Southern accents. The 2024 Hulu show, The Veil, suffers from this affliction. Created and written by Stephen Knight, creator of Peaky Blinders and Great Expectations, the latter of which I flash reviewed in a previous video. Its premise intrigues. Imogen, a female MI6 agent, and Adela, a suspected female ISIS commander that Imogen is tasked with exposing, begin to care for each other. Much as I enjoyed the show, it suffers from two pronounced flaws. The first is that the show, filmed in desert settings, Paris and Istanbul for the most part, is shot with a green-gray filter. I have no idea what that was supposed to connote, except that the spy world is murky. The other problem is with Imogen, as played by Elizabeth Moss, renowned for taking on torturous roles, such as, of course, one of the great shows of all time, The Handmaid's Tale. Remember that scene where she gave birth alone? It may have been the most grueling TV scene I ever witnessed. Anyway, speaking in a vague approximation of a British accent, practically everything out of her mouth in this show makes you cringe. Love you anyway, Elizabeth. Which begs the question, why are British actors so much better at Gen Am than Americans doing what is called received pronunciation, the BBC accent? You can completely forget about Americans doing any of the regional British accent. Why is this? I'll tell you why. Because Americans are American and they can do what they want abroad? Well, I won't go that far. It is, I think, because American actors are rarely called upon to do an English accent, maybe once in their careers if that. Thus, they don't feel compelled to devote a lot of time and effort to acquiring it. British actors, however, are always looking for work in the United States, where the volume of work and money is. Once an actor perfects Gen Am and perfected, the The British often do. It goes into their resume, and they can dust it off and trot it out on a regular basis. But, as with American actors, best to stay away from Southern accents. That leaves the obvious final question to be begged. Why wasn't a British actress cast to play Imogen? Like, for example, Imogen Poots. Know her? Obviously, it doesn't have to be her. I just love saying that name, as charming as it is classy. Imogen. See you next time.